The Great Pyramid is a testament to ancient Egyptians' ingenuity, acumen, and technical and scientific prowess.
2.5 million stone blocks, fitted so tight you cannot slide a playing card between them. And the best explanation mainstream science has offered in 100 years is, they used ramps. That's it. That's the answer in every textbook. That's what every museum placard tells you. That's the story taught in classrooms on every continent for over a century. And not one person in an official position has ever answered the follow-up question seriously.
Italian and Scottish researchers, mainly from the University of Pisa, conducted advanced high-frequency radar mapping under Egypt's famous pyramids.
An AI called Grok was given the hieroglyphic inscriptions from the temple complexes at Abydos last month. Nobody told it what to conclude. Nobody had a career to protect or funding to lose. It was given one instruction: read these inscriptions as engineering documents, not ceremonial ones.
You can think of the Great Pyramid as a colossal special effect, clad in white limestone, polished smooth. For them, they were religious. They were magical.
What it found is what this video is about. Because the precision isn't the only problem. It's not even the strangest one. The strangest one is this: the blocks aren't just tight, they are consistent. The same sub-millimeter tolerances, repeated across 2.3 million individual placements, across decades of construction, in desert heat, without a single laser, a single calibrated instrument, or, according to the official story, anything more sophisticated than wood, rope, and sand.
Tens of thousands of people here building the pyramids. Where's their settlement?
6 million tons of stone, shaped and transported over 30 years.
That consistency is what no ramp model has ever explained. And it's exactly what the Abydos inscription appears to address. So here's the question. Nobody on mainstream television asks out loud. How do you explain that consistency using ramps and sledges? The short answer is you can't. Not fully. Not honestly. Here's where it gets strange. What Grok pulled out of those inscriptions isn't ancient alien speculation. It isn't fringe mythology. It is physics, documented, peer-reviewed, laboratory-confirmed, mapped against a 3,300-year-old inscription in a way that has no comfortable explanation. The inscription describes a device. The device has identifiable components. And the physics it describes was only confirmed in a laboratory for the first time in 1987. That gap, 3,300 years between the inscription and the lab confirmation, is what this video is about.
The Great Pyramid is equivalent to the Empire State Building of its day. It reaches 480 feet tall, and for about 4,000 years, it is the tallest man-made structure on the planet.
The problem that won't go away. Before we get to the inscription, you need to understand why the precision problem refuses to disappear, no matter how many times mainstream archaeology tries to close the door on it. The standard ramp theory has several versions. External ramps that spiraled up the outside of the pyramid as it was built. Internal ramp systems with branching corridors. A straight ramp on a single face. Each version has been modeled, calculated, and critiqued by engineers, not fringe researchers, actual structural engineers, and each version produces the same uncomfortable answer. The ramp required to move blocks of that size to the heights required would have been a construction project comparable in scale to the pyramid itself. It would have required nearly as much material as the pyramid.
It's composed of an estimated 2.3 million blocks of stones, weighing an estimated 6 million tons.
It would have left a geological footprint that should still be partially visible today. And the precision. Every ramp model hits the same wall. A block dragged on wooden sledges over sand or wet clay accumulates contact forces along its edges. It vibrates. It shifts. It doesn't arrive at its destination in a condition that allows sub-millimeter joint tolerances. Physics doesn't allow it. Friction doesn't allow it. The people who built the Great Pyramid understood something about moving stone that we have either lost or have not yet rediscovered. The question Grok was asked to investigate is whether the answer was recorded, whether the builders actually left a description of what they knew, and whether that description has been sitting in plain sight, misread, for a century. The answer, according to Grok's analysis, appears to be yes.
When hieroglyphics are first translated in the 1820s, it unlocks a trove of new information about the pyramids of Egypt and why they were built.
What Grok found when it read the inscriptions differently. The inscriptions in question come from temple contexts dated to the New Kingdom period, around 1300 BCE, carvings produced during the reign of Seti I, long after the pyramids themselves were built, but potentially preserving knowledge the New Kingdom priests inherited from earlier sources. When Grok was asked to analyze descriptions of these inscription registers, not as ceremonial art, not as religious iconography, but as engineering documentation, the pattern that emerged was striking. The middle register of the inscriptions, the section that Egyptological commentaries have historically flagged as inconsistent with the surrounding ceremonial context, without further analysis, depicts a central object shown in cross-section. And here's where the AI approach produced something unexpected. Grok flagged that cross-section view immediately, because the Egyptians used cross-section rendering in a specific and consistent way. When they wanted to show you a boat's interior, they cut the hull open visually and showed you the compartments. When they drew storage vessels, they showed you the interior layering. Cross-section was not a decorative convention, it was a technical convention. It was the way Egyptian draftsmen communicated, here is how this object works on the inside. The object shown in cross-section in the middle register is a cylinder, open at the top, narrowing at the base, with a series of horizontal lines inside, the same convention used to show layered materials or internal compartments. Around the exterior of the cylinder are 8 curved projections, evenly spaced. Ask yourself, what does a cylinder with 8 evenly spaced curved projections around its exterior, shown producing something outward in all directions, look like to an engineer rather than an art historian? Grok's answer, it looks like an acoustic emitter array. Specifically, it matches the geometry of what modern acoustic engineers call an octaphonic speaker configuration. 8 sound sources arranged around a central axis, designed to create a standing wave field in the space between them. And above the cylinder, separated by a visible gap, no ropes, no levers, no human hands, is a rectangular stone block, floating.
Most Egyptian hieroglyphics, even the ones inside the pyramids, they're offering you names, they're offering you dates, they're offering you legacies of the pharaohs, who the rulers were, they're talking about the afterlife a little bit.
The text that describes a machine. The inscription doesn't just show the device, it describes how it operates. And this is where Grok's linguistic analysis became particularly pointed. The operational text uses a verb form, sidid in the transliteration, that appears in other Egyptian technical texts to describe the activation of a mechanism, not a prayer, not a ritual invocation, a mechanism being activated. The same grammatical construction appears in descriptions of boats being launched, of millstones being set in motion, of irrigation gates being opened. The object being caused to move is identified with a determinative marker, a small classificatory symbol that tells you what category of thing is being referenced. The determinative attached here is not the one used for spiritual phenomena or divine objects. It is the one used for heavy objects requiring mechanical assistance, boats, obelisks, large stone structures. This is not describing a miracle. It is describing an engineering task. The result described in the text uses a phrase that translates literally as lifted without end or suspended continuously. Not lifted and placed, continuously suspended, held in suspension and guided. The text then describes a 3-stage operational sequence. Stage 1, activation. The device is set in motion. Stage 2, suspension. The block rises and remains suspended. not lifted briefly and set down, continuously held. Stage 3. Guidance. Using a word that elsewhere in Egyptian technical texts describes the steering of boats using poles. The suspended block is moved by being guided, not by being pushed. Think about what that 3-stage sequence describes in physical terms. A device is switched on. An object rises and stays suspended. That object is then guided to its destination. The device is switched off. The object settles under its own weight into precise contact with the surface below. That is not a religious rite. That is an operating procedure. Grok identified this sequence and flagged something that should make every physicist watching this lean forward in their chair. That 3-stage protocol, activation, suspension, guidance, is the exact protocol used in modern acoustic levitation research. Not a similar protocol, not a loosely analogous one. The same sequence, in the same order, for the same reasons.
I realized I had to turn my back to the pyramids to properly understand them. Because to properly understand them, you need to know about the people who built them, their civilization, their society.
The physics that makes this more than speculation. Here is where this stops being an ancient mystery story and becomes a physics conversation. Because acoustic levitation is not a fringe concept. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is documented science that you can find in peer-reviewed journals published by institutions with names you recognize. In 1987, researchers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory used acoustic standing waves, sound waves bouncing between two surfaces to create a stable pressure field, to levitate liquid droplets and small solid objects. This was not on Earth, where gravity makes large-scale acoustic levitation harder. This was in a microgravity environment aboard a space shuttle mission. The objects floated. Sound created an even lifting force across their entire surface. In 2014, a team at the University of Tokyo published research in Applied Physics Letters demonstrating that 3-dimensional acoustic levitation could not only suspend small objects, but move them through space with precision. The technique used an array of speakers to create a standing wave field. The object moved by following pressure nodes that could be shifted between speakers, guided through air, as the researchers described it, the way a boat is steered through water. The same 2-stage process, suspension, then guidance, in a 2014 physics journal, described in language that echoes, uncomfortably closely, the language in a 3,300-year-old inscription. In 2019, a team at the University of Bristol demonstrated acoustic levitation of objects weighing up to 70 grams using high-intensity ultrasonic arrays. 70 grams is not a pyramid block. But the scaling relationship in acoustic levitation is linear. Double the power output of the array, double the liftable mass. The Bristol team's published paper noted that the theoretical upper limit using current technology is several kilograms, with more powerful emitters extending that further. The question is not whether acoustic levitation can, in principle, lift heavy objects. The physics says it can. The question is whether the ancient Egyptians had a device capable of generating the required acoustic field at the required intensity. And that is exactly what the inscription appears to be describing.
If you do that, you get the kind of accuracy that the Egyptians have achieved when they aligned their pyramids 1/10 of 1 degree. It's a remarkable achievement.
The cylinder with 8 projections. Let's return to the device itself, because Grok's geometric analysis here is where the argument becomes genuinely difficult to dismiss. 8 evenly spaced curved projections around a resonating cylinder. That is not a decorative flourish. That is not a coincidence. That is the geometry that acoustic engineers use today when they design levitation arrays. The reason is mathematical. 8 symmetrically placed sound sources around a central axis create a standing wave field with the specific nodal structure required to produce stable levitation. Points of minimum pressure where objects collect and remain stable against gravity. You don't arrive at an octaphonic arrangement by accident. You arrive at it by understanding, through whatever means, mathematical or empirical, that this configuration produces the effect you want. The ancient builders either derived the geometry mathematically, which implies a level of acoustic physics knowledge we have no other record of, or they arrived at it empirically, through observation and testing. Building versions of the device, adjusting the number and placement of emitters, observing the results, and arriving at 8 as the optimal configuration. Either explanation is extraordinary. Neither explanation fits the official story. The inscription also describes the cylinder's contents in a 3-part sequence. Air in motion, nephu, the Egyptian word for breath or moving air. Change of state, kia, transformation, a shift in relationship. Stone, in air, specifically the word used for pyramid block stone. Air in motion, change of state. Stone. Grok's analysis flagged this sequence as a functional description of what sound waves actually do to matter. Sound is air in motion. When it interacts with a physical object at sufficient intensity, it changes the relationship between that object and the gravitational field. It causes a change of state in the effective weight of the stone. The stone responds by rising. The Egyptians did not have the vocabulary for sound wave. They had the vocabulary for breath in motion. The physics is the same. The word is different. The phenomenon described is identical.
The Great Pyramid is absolutely elegant and marvelous, even by standards today.
The guidance mechanism, the detail that seals it. There is one more element in the inscription that Grok identified as the most technically specific detail of all, and it is the element that mainstream commentary has consistently treated as decorative. On the far left of the middle register, outside the main device depiction, a figure stands at a distance from the cylinder. This figure is not in a ceremonial posture, not the arms-raised position of prayer, not the prostrate position of worship. The figure is standing at a working distance, holding an object in an extended hand. The object is drawn as a rod with a curved end. The same object appears in 3 other contexts in Egyptian technical art: in depictions of musical instrument manufacture, in drawings of sacred sound chamber construction, in diagrams of boat rudder assemblies. It is a control implement, a steering device. The figure is an operator, working a device from a safe distance. The critical phrase is safe distance. Why would an operator stand away from the device? Because the acoustic field produced by the device is strong enough that proximity is inadvisable. A standing wave field powerful enough to levitate stone is powerful enough to cause physical harm to an unprotected human body in close proximity. You would not want to stand next to it while it was running. You would want to operate it from a safe distance using a control implement extended toward it. That is not a ceremonial detail. That is an engineering safety precaution. And this is the point where you need to ask yourself a serious question. Could all of these elements, the cross-section rendering convention, the activation terminology, the 3-stage operating protocol, the octaphonic emitter geometry, the operator standing at a safe distance with a control implement, could all of these independently align with modern acoustic levitation technology by coincidence? What is the probability of that? What is the alternative?
I think not about how the Egyptians built the pyramid. I think more about how the pyramids built Egypt.
The line they skip. There is a final register in these inscriptions. A single sentence that standard published translations have either not addressed fully or have described as damaged and unclear. High-resolution photographic examination of the inscription, conducted independently, indicates the line is intact, not damaged, legible. The sentence reads, "This is the secret of the first builders, carried from the time before the flood, not to be shown to those who were not initiated." The first builders, not the builders of the New Kingdom temples, not Khufu's workforce. The first builders, a civilization or a lineage of knowledge that predated everything we officially recognize as ancient Egypt. The device described in this inscription was not a New Kingdom invention. The text claims it was inherited, preserved, transmitted across a gap in time so large the Egyptians themselves called it before the flood, a gap that separates an earlier civilization from the one we know. Does that phrase prove the existence of a pre-flood civilization with acoustic technology? No. What it proves is that the people who carved this inscription believed they were recording inherited knowledge, knowledge they received rather than generated. Whether that belief was accurate, whether the lineage of transmission was real or mythologized, is a separate question. What is not a separate question is what the inscription describes, and what it describes is a functioning acoustic levitation device.
There were tens of thousands of people here building the pyramids. Where's their settlement?
Why this matters now, the AI angle. You might be asking at this point, why is an AI finding this when trained Egyptologists haven't? The answer is not that Egyptologists are incompetent. The answer is that Egyptologists are trained to read inscriptions in a specific framework: religious, ceremonial, political. When an inscription appears in a temple context, every interpretive tool brought to bear on it is calibrated for religious meaning. The question, "What does this mean ritually?" is asked automatically. The question, "What does this describe mechanically?" is almost never asked, because the assumption that ancient Egyptians didn't have mechanical devices worth describing is baked into the methodology before the first hieroglyph is read. Grok has no such assumption baked in. An AI approaches a text with the parameters you give it. When the parameter is "read this as an engineering document," it reads it as an engineering document. When the parameter is "identify components that match known physical phenomena," it identifies them without needing to defend a prior interpretation or protect a published position. The result is a reading of an inscription that has existed for over a century, that has been photographed, referenced, and noted as technically inconsistent with context by credentialed scholars, that nobody in the academic literature has followed to its logical conclusion. That conclusion is this: the inscription is a technical manual. It describes a device. The device produces acoustic levitation, and the pyramid blocks were placed using it.
In building those 3 giant pyramids, he basically did all the research and development that led to the perfection of the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza.
The acoustic architecture of the pyramid itself. Now here's a piece of this that Grok flagged as potentially the most significant corroborating detail, and it has nothing to do with inscriptions. It is about the physical dimensions of the pyramid's chambers. The king's chamber in the Great Pyramid is constructed from red granite. Its dimensions, approximately 10.5 meters by 5.2 meters by 5.8 meters high, produce a standing acoustic resonance at a specific frequency when a continuous tone is introduced into the space. Engineers who have measured this have documented the resonant frequency at approximately 111 Hz. 111 Hz is not a random number. In modern cymatics research, the study of how sound shapes matter, 111 Hz is documented as the frequency at which water crystallizes into geometric patterns. It is also the frequency at which granite begins to exhibit measurable piezoelectric response. Piezoelectric response means the stone itself produces a small electrical charge when vibrated at that frequency. The granite is not passive at 111 Hz. It is active. It responds. Now ask this. If you were designing a room intended to house an acoustic levitation device, a room whose physical dimensions would amplify and stabilize the specific frequencies required for the device to function at maximum efficiency, would you build it from granite? Would you calibrate its dimensions to resonate at the operating frequency of the device? Of course you would. The king's chamber may not be a tomb. It may be an acoustic amplification chamber, a purpose-built room designed to maximize the performance of a device whose operating principles are described in the inscriptions. The dimensions are not arbitrary. The material is not arbitrary. The location inside the structure whose stones the device was used to place is not arbitrary. Everything connects. And the connection runs not through mythology or speculation, but through physics.
They were long suspected to be tombs for pharaohs, and the hieroglyphics confirm this. But as more of these hieroglyphics are translated, we find out that maybe these pyramids had another function as well.
The suppression pattern and why it matters. Here is something worth sitting with, regardless of where you land on the interpretation of the inscriptions themselves. Access to the specific temple chambers where these inscriptions are housed has been restricted by permit for decades. A team of acoustic engineers reportedly filed an application to conduct acoustic resonance testing inside the king's chamber, non-invasive sound testing, carrying no realistic risk of damage to granite, and the application was denied. The denial cited potential acoustic damage to ancient surfaces. Granite. They cited potential damage to granite from a survey-level sound test. The technical drawings from 19th century European expeditions that documented the AS7 North Wall inscriptions in detail are held in major museum archives, catalogued but not digitized, accessible only by appointment and subject to extended review processes. The inscription itself, the cylinder, the 8 projections, the 3-stage operating protocol, the line about the first builders, remains visible on the limestone wall. It has been photographed. The photographs exist in archive. What has not happened, in over a century of modern Egyptology, is a published engineering analysis of what the device depicted in that inscription actually does. Not dismissed, not debunked, simply never analyzed. That is a strange absence. When you find an ancient technical drawing that nobody has analyzed technically, you have to ask why the analysis hasn't happened. The drawing exists. The photographs exist. The credentialed scholars who flagged the inscription as technically inconsistent with context are on record. The follow-up question, technically inconsistent in what way and what does the technical inconsistency depict, has not produced a published answer. Grok asked that follow-up question. The answer it produced is what you've been watching.
There's a group of hieroglyphics that line the subterranean chambers of the pyramids at Saqqara, and these date to around 23 or 2400 BC, and they've become known as the pyramid texts.
What acoustic levitation at scale would actually explain. Let's put the practical picture together, because this is where the theory stops feeling abstract and starts feeling like the obvious answer to a problem that has resisted solution for a century. A levitated block does not drag across the surface beneath it. It floats. It does not accumulate edge damage from being hauled. It does not generate friction that shifts its orientation. It arrives at its destination in the same condition it left the quarry. It is then guided, gently, through phase adjustment of the acoustic field, into position above the course below it. The field is slowly reduced. The block descends. As it approaches the stone below, the acoustic field controls its final approach, bringing it into contact with the precision of a standing wave null, the point of minimum pressure, positioned exactly where the joint needs to be. The block settles. The field is deactivated. The block sits, under its own weight, in exact contact with the block beneath it. You cannot slide a playing card between them. This is not a mystery in this model. The precision is not an anomaly requiring separate explanation. The precision is a direct mechanical consequence of the method. The acoustic field is the explanation for both the ability to move the blocks and the ability to place them with sub-millimeter accuracy. One device, one physics principle. Both problems solved simultaneously. Consider what this means for the workforce question. Conventional models require tens of thousands of laborers coordinating across years, hauling stone across desert terrain, up increasingly steep ramps that would themselves have required enormous engineering investment to construct and then dismantle. The logistics alone strain credibility. A workforce operating acoustic levitation devices is a different picture entirely. Smaller, more specialized, more priestly than physical, a technical class that understood the device, maintained it, operated it, and kept the knowledge of it confined to those who had passed through initiation. That is not a labor force, that is a guild, and guilds protect their methods. They always have. This reframes the entire social history of the pyramid's construction. It explains why no mass graves of exhausted workers have ever been found at scale. It explains the conspicuous absence of the logistical infrastructure, the ramp systems, the tool stockpiles, the waste debris that hauling 2.3 million blocks of stone should have produced in quantities we would still be excavating today. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but when the absence is this systematic, this complete, it starts to look like evidence of a different method entirely. Now here's a question for you in the comments. What would it take for you to accept this as the real answer? What evidence, if it were made accessible, would move this from compelling theory to settled history for you? I genuinely want to know what the threshold is. Tell me below.
These hieroglyphics suggest a potential purpose for the pyramids, and it starts with a fundamental ancient Egyptian belief. Like many other world traditions, these texts reveal that they believe in an eternal soul.
What Grok's analysis actually changes? There is a version of this conversation that goes, "Interesting theory, but we can't prove it, so it remains speculation." That version of the conversation is the wrong one. Here's why. We already cannot fully explain the pyramid's precision using the accepted model. That is not a fringe claim. That is an engineering problem that structural engineers and physicists have acknowledged for decades. The accepted model has a gap in it. The gap is not small. The gap is the size of 2.3 million stone blocks fitted to tolerances that the model cannot account for. Grok's analysis doesn't need to prove acoustic levitation was used. It needs to show that acoustic levitation is a coherent, physics-consistent explanation that resolves the gap the accepted model leaves open. It does that. It does it using a device depicted in an ancient inscription, described in ancient technical terminology, whose geometry matches modern acoustic engineering and whose operating protocol matches modern acoustic levitation research. Is this proven? No. Is it provable if the right research access were granted? Yes. Acoustic resonance testing inside the King's Chamber. Engineering analysis of the AS7 North Wall device depiction. Peer-reviewed comparative analysis of the inscription's terminology against modern acoustic physics literature. None of these research programs are exotic. None require new technology. All have been blocked, delayed, or simply never pursued. And that pattern of non-pursuit deserves its own scrutiny. When a research question is this specific, this testable, and this consequential, and it still doesn't get funded, still doesn't get access, still doesn't appear on the agenda of a single major Egyptological institution, you have to ask what force is organizing that silence. Bureaucratic inertia is real. Institutional conservatism is real. But bureaucratic inertia does not explain why acoustic resonance testing of the King's Chamber, a non-invasive procedure requiring no physical alteration of the site, has never been formally proposed and approved in the entire modern history of pyramid research. That is not delay. That is a decision. The question that lingers isn't whether the ancient Egyptians understood acoustic levitation. The question is why we haven't seriously tried to find out.
Coppens cites multiple examples of completely untouched burial chambers inside pyramids. No grave robbers have accessed them, and yet, when modern archaeologists finally open these chambers, bodies are nowhere to be found.
The line from the inscription. Let's end where the inscription ends, with the sentence in the lower register, the one that has been described as damaged in published notes, but appears intact in high-resolution photography. This is the secret of the first builders, carried from the time before the flood, not to be shown to those who were not initiated. The first builders, carried across a catastrophic rupture in human history, preserved by a priestly class as technical knowledge too valuable and too dangerous to share openly. Carved into limestone 3,300 years ago in a chamber inside a temple complex that still stands. The device they described sits in that inscription. The physics it describes is real. The laboratory experiments that confirm the physics are documented. The pyramid that demonstrates the precision this physics would produce is still standing at Giza. And the question that Grok asked, the question no Egyptologist has answered in a published paper, is still sitting there on the north wall, carved in white limestone, waiting. What if the ancient Egyptians didn't build the pyramids the hard way? What if they built them the smart way? And what if the secret was never lost, just locked away, permit restricted, cataloged but undigitized, examined but never analyzed, waiting for an AI to finally ask the right question? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the acoustic levitation theory holds up? Do you think the permit restrictions are deliberate suppression or standard bureaucratic delay? And do you believe there's an earlier civilization behind the device described in this inscription? Because next week, we're going deeper. We're looking at what the Bristol University paper actually says about acoustic scaling limits, and we're running it against the specific block weights at Giza. The numbers, when you put them side by side, will change how you see the pyramid. Subscribe so you don't miss that one.